Okay. Thanks. That's all right.
I was able to get something up on Twitter. I wasn't able to do Facebook.
So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. I am really delighted that everybody's here. I just want to confirm with my team, is our camcorder on? Does anyone know?
Yes, it is.
It is. Okay, great. So let's begin. I'm Jennifer Laszlo Mizrahi, and I am so delighted to have so many Hill staffers here who are really the future of this issue. I know that for some of you, you're learning about this for the first time, and that some of you are complete pros on this. But we have some tremendous speakers, and I just could not be happier. First of all, we're going to have Governor Jack Markell. He's the governor of Delaware. He was just fairly recently reelected with, I think, the highest percentages of the vote ever. And he's a tremendously terrific public servant on all the usual issues that you would deal with, whether it's the economy or crime or whatever governors usually do. But in addition to his duties as governor, he took on to be the chair of the National Governors Association. And when you are the leader of the 50 governors and those from the territories, you can pick one issue to focus on and to help the other governors focus on, and he picked employment for people with disabilities. He did an incredible job. He inspired so many people and so much change, so I'm so delighted he's going to get to, I mean, I could talk about him for hours, but I want to hear from him, so I'll let him do that. TJ Lavin is a sports superstar. He is the host of The Challenge on MTV. He himself did have a significant accident, and so he has personal experience with disability himself personally, and also with some of his friends. We're going to hear from Pete Sessions, the congressman from Texas, who's done so much. He himself is the proud father of an Eagle Scout who happens to have Down syndrome. And I found when we put out that we were doing this event, I found a Hill staffer, Matthew Crowbury, who actually is a multi-gold Olympian in the Paralympics. I actually printed it out. He has won 5 gold medals, 2 silvers, 1 bronze, and holds the world record in swimming. He also is working for Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, and he is an expert on employment for people with disabilities in his country of Australia, New South Wales. So, starting with the governor.
Thank you, Jennifer. Nice to see all of you and to be with TJ and Matthew. And I'm sorry that Congressman Sessions is not here at the moment. He is just an unbelievable leader on these issues. So about 10 or 11 years ago, I was visiting a Delaware employer, which is a very good employer of people with disabilities. And I met a guy who was 25 years old, and he was making t-shirts. He had Down syndrome. And he was like just absolutely thrilled to have this job. And I asked him what he did before he got the job. And he told me that he had sat at home for 6 years watching TV with his parents. And a light bulb went off in my head. And it was one that has burned bright ever since then, when I saw the unbelievably profound improvement in his quality of life because he had this job, because he had a reason to get up every day, he had a purpose. He was part of a team, part of something that was bigger than himself, and he even got a paycheck. And I realized as well the profound improvement in the quality of life of his family members, because no longer were they sitting at home with him every day watching TV, while frankly he was getting depressed and not eating healthfully and everything that goes along with it. So when I had the opportunity to become chair of the National Governors Association, and as Jennifer said, in that role I got to pick one issue for the organization to focus on, I thought, boy, you know, in a time of incredible political dysfunction around the country, and in a time when Democrats and Republicans don't really seem to agree on anything, I want to pick an issue where we're going to produce a report that doesn't just sit on a shelf, one where we can actually come up with a lot of practical things, tangible things that states can do to move the needle, to get more people with disabilities working, and that would be supported equally by Democrats and Republicans. And I really believe, and I continue to believe, that this issue of employment for people with disabilities is exactly that issue. And, the statistics, and Jennifer can share with you statistics, but the bottom line is the unemployment rate for people with disabilities is significantly higher than it is for everybody else. And there are an awful lot of people around the country who have the ability to work, but they've never been given a shot. Because the focus is always about is always on the disability, when the focus ought to be on the ability. And I can tell you, no matter which member of Congress you support, there are people in that constituency who would like to be working, and because they have a disability, have never been given a fair shot. And I'm hopeful that the reason you all have come is because you and your members share a vision that when we, think about it, that's not a good outcome either for the constituencies, for the constituents themselves, or for us as a society. And the bottom line is there are actually things that we can do about it. So when we kicked off this initiative at the National Governors Association, we first heard from a panel of experts, mainly people with disabilities themselves, or people representing disability organizations, but a lot of people with disabilities themselves, to pick their brains. We talked to some academics about research in the field. We listened to people in the business community. And then we had a couple of bigger meetings with states. We had about between 30 and 35 states in total represented at one meeting in Seattle and one meeting in Pittsburgh. And so after all of that, basically a year's worth of effort, what we came up with were 5 key things to focus on. The first one is really changing the way we do, I'll put it this way, integrating this issue with the broader workforce development effort. In all of the states where your members work, there are folks who are responsible in state government for putting people to work, oftentimes in the Department of Labor. But for too often, the issue around putting people with disabilities to work has been a standalone issue. It's been shunted off to the side. And what has happened too often is that the people within the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation have been put in a position where they go talk to the employer and say, will you please do me a favor? I've got these 5 people with disabilities who are looking for work. Can you do me a favor and find a place for them to work? That's not a very good strategy. Because you have to look at this from the perspective of the employer. And so what we're saying is that the people in the states more and more have to become partners and understand what the hiring needs are of these businesses. And to focus on, and the fact is, businesses throughout all of your districts, businesses want to hire people with a certain level of skills. And that level of skills is going to differ business by business. And so the job of the people in vocational rehabilitation, more and more, has got to be to say, okay, we understand that these are the kinds of skills you're looking for, and we've got a whole bunch of people for you to look at. Some of them may have a disability, some of them may not, but because we're focused on the ability rather than the disability, we've been able to identify for you a range of people who can meet those skills. That was number 1. Number 2, we've got to do a much better job of getting businesses to understand the value. And for too long, the idea behind businesses hiring people with disabilities has been, okay, well, this is a matter of charity. That's not what this is about. And when the CEO of Walgreens says to his peers, other CEOs, as I heard him say, that we at Walgreens hire people with disabilities not as a matter of charity, but because it's in the best interest of our shareholders, because these employees are good employees, they show up on time, there's less turnover, there's less absenteeism, they're grateful to have the job, and they do a good job, that's powerful. And so one of the things that we've tried to do is to get more and more businesses to hear that message. And it's not just big businesses, by the way, it's businesses of all sizes. That's the second piece. The third piece is that states and the federal government, the local governments need to be model employers. It's not enough for us to go and say to a business, you need to hire more people with disabilities. We need to do it ourselves, and we need to be able to tell the stories about how it's worked for us. And we think when government is a model employer and showing that people with disabilities can do a great job in our offices, that's very powerful. We've got to do a better job of that. That's the third thing. The fourth thing is we've got to do a better job of helping our young people transition. For too long, people with disabilities were prepared for a future where there was really no expectation that they were going to be able to work. There was an expectation that they ought to prepare while they're, a kid, and then, an adolescent. May as well prepare for a lifetime of being on public support, because that's as good as it was going to get. It's not true. And if you help these young kids from a young age learn the skills and get exposure to the workplace, it's incredible what it will do in terms of preparing them for a successful future and work. And then that was the fourth thing, and then the last piece was around leveraging the other resources, because as you all know, and I'm sure in almost all your states, financial resources are limited, but there are foundations and there are some federal programs and the like that can be helpful. So we concluded our project in August, just last week or 2 weeks ago. Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin, everybody here from Wisconsin? Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin, in his State of the State speech, launched his own initiative around employing people with disabilities, which was modeled on the MGA initiative. Governor Branstad from Iowa is doing some similar work, and I think more and more you're going to be seeing across the country these kinds of programs. And I think there are lots of opportunities at the federal level, and particularly for when you're working in a member's office, for you to support the work going on in states, for you to help identify for people at the state level what some of the federal programs and federal resources are. And I don't know, I'm sure you all have, there's lots of really interesting issues that you're working on. But when you get to meet somebody who is now working and had not been given a shot for years, but because of something that you have done, some kind of collaboration that you've achieved with somebody in the state, and that person's now working when before they weren't, you imagine the kind of life changes that you've helped inspire. And so that's what it's all about. So I appreciate the chance to show up. I don't know if you want me to take a couple questions.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm happy to take a couple questions, and I've got to take off and head back to Delaware. But if anybody has any questions, happy to. Well, if not, Jennifer knows how to get a hold of me. Thanks for coming. I'm sure these guys, TJ and Matthew, are going to be, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have questions. Because this was a program, correct, that was implemented. I was curious if there was any kind of legislation on the state legislature that helped with this at all.
We did pass one bill. It's called an Employment First bill, which we can share with you. Maybe we can, through Jennifer, we can get it to all the offices. But this is really this is more about changing attitudes.
Right.
It's about awareness. It's about skill development. It's about a commitment to making sure that we are doing our work differently, both in service to the businesses and in preparing our kids. So this is one, and which I think is actually good, because from your perspective, I know there's been probably a lot of frustration about not a lot getting done here in terms of legislation, but hopefully you all can define your roles in a way that's bigger than just whether or not a particular bill gets passed, and what, if you define the role about whether or not you're actually changing the lives of people in your districts, there are lots of ways you can help, even if it doesn't relate to passing a bill.
So can you talk about Walgreens and some of the companies and how they're doing it without government money?
Yeah, so I visit, Walgreens is a phenomenal employer of people with disabilities, and they started this a few years ago, and they picked 2 of their distribution centers. As you can imagine, Walgreens has distribution centers all over the country. And they chose one in South Carolina and one in Connecticut, where they said, we're going to hire a significant number of people with disabilities at these distribution centers, and we're going to see how it goes. And as you can imagine, a company like Walgreens measures every possible metric in terms of performance, because they're so focused on cost controls and efficiencies and everything else. And when they looked at it, their centers in South Carolina and in Connecticut outperformed the other centers. Outperformed the centers where there was not a particularly large portion of people with disabilities. And so when that happens, and the CEO of Walgreens can say to the CEO of OfficeMax and UPS and Lowe's and others that we're providing these employment opportunities to people with disabilities because this is what makes sense, it's powerful. Another company that, mid-sized company, they make windows. They're actually based in the Washington area. They had been pushed for a long time to hire people with disabilities, and they kept saying, it doesn't make any sense, it's too dangerous, we can't do it. And finally they said, all right, we're gonna give it a shot. And they hired a person, and it worked out really, really well. And they hired another person, and it worked really well. And what they found is that they actually made the company safer. In addition to better, it made the company safer because they were more thoughtful at the outset about their processes. So their employees with disabilities didn't get hurt, but of course that made it safer for everybody else. I mean, this cuts across so many different industries. The National Security Agency is like one of the best federal employers of people with disabilities. If they can do it, why can't every government agency?
Can you talk about this, the people with autism and what they're doing in your state?
So, I think a very exciting opportunity. Again, as with for people with many disabilities, a lot of times people with autism have not been given a real shot of meaningful employment. So, a guy from Denmark who has a son who's now about 16. A few years ago, his son was probably 13 at the time. And he saw his son seated at the kitchen table. And he had a piece of paper about that big. And he was drawing on the piece of paper, and he was making these boxes, and the boxes were connected. They were not all symmetrical, just sort of odd boxes all over the piece of paper, all connected to each other. And in every box, there was a letter and a number. And the guy says, I don't know what this is. And then he realized about 5 months earlier, they had been on a car trip somewhere in Europe. And the son had been sitting in the back of the car looking at the book of maps, you know those books of maps where you have the grid that connects to like all the pages inside. And so the guy's looking at what his son's doing. And he goes out to the car and he gets the book of maps, and they're identical. And ever since then he said, I will give you $1 if you can find one error in here, and he's never had to give $1 away. The point is, this father knew that his son's skills, his son's abilities, could be of value somewhere. That doesn't mean his son doesn't have the challenges that people with autism have. There are challenges that come with having autism. So his father was concerned about the son's potential career trajectory or lack of one, and started this business called Specialisterne. It means the specialist people in Danish. And he set out to find job opportunities for people with autism. And so he's actually moved his family to Delaware because he has the objective of creating 100,000 jobs in 10 years in the United States or more. And he's forged partnerships with SAP, with other IT firms. I introduced him to Microsoft. He's been in Davos the last 2 years at the World Economic Forum and has made great contacts. And so I've now had the chance to meet a few of the young people with autism who are doing work for local customers out of the Delaware training office. And so they vet, not everybody with autism can do this particular kind of work, and it's around data analysis, software testing, that kind of thing. Not everybody with autism can do it, but there are a lot who can. And so I was over at their office just a few weeks ago, and I met them. And I mean, it's a very powerful thing to see. It doesn't mean, this doesn't, resolve whatever, communications challenges these young men and women, these were primarily young men, have, but they have a job. And they knew that they were adding value, and they knew they were getting a paycheck. And so that is just one example, but very, very powerful.
Question in the back.
I apologize, I'm sitting behind you. Thank you, Governor, for all that you're doing. In about half an hour, President Obama is signing an executive order that will raise the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour, and that includes for people with disabilities who, as you know, are currently earning a sub-minimum wage.
Right.
Is your state or other states looking to follow suit? As we know, if people earn more money, particularly those with disabilities who have been living in poverty, this can help lift people out of poverty.
So we haven't, we very, you know, we did not really address that issue in our.
Do you want to explain what the issue is? Because I don't think many people are familiar.
So the issue, and others may be able to explain it better than me, there are people with disabilities have a significant range of abilities. And some of them can do the kind of, you know, high-level software analysis and testing that I was talking about. We met programmers when we were at Highmark. But then there are people with really their abilities are much more limited. And I've been at, you know, they've historically been called sheltered workshops, but there are, you know, other names for them as well, where people, let's say an agency, it might be Goodwill or it might be Easter Seals or something like that, may enter into contracts with local businesses to do a variety of tasks. And it could be, you know, moving stickers from, you know, a set of stickers onto, you know, an envelope or something like that. And there are some people whose abilities are, you know, better geared toward doing that kind of work than they might be toward doing other kind of work. And for those jobs, it's been what, you know, it's really not been possible for the Easter Seals of the world to get paid an amount of money by the customer such that they can pay those individuals the minimum wage, the regular minimum wage. And so in that case, those folks were paid less than minimum wage, called the sub-minimum wage. And so this has been a very hot issue in the disability community. And so I just learned that President Obama, in his executive order, is going to be making, I guess, the 10-10 pay to employees of federal, I guess, contractors.
Right, for
federal contractors. It's going to apply to everybody. It's not really been an issue that we've spent a lot of time on at the state level, but I think this will certainly elevate the issue.
And I think the folks in this room who work here on the Hill might want to know that there is a bill that's coming out soon in the Senate, which was talked about during the State of the Union address, to also raise the minimum wage to $10.10 per hour for all people.
I just have a logistics issue from the community side. I've joined Respectability and Jennifer doing governor meetings in states. I can tell the staffers here there's not one state where there's not disability leaders that know about this report and are so excited about the NGA report and hope that their state's next and are pushing with their own governor. So we're thrilled about it and we report on it weekly. I'm curious though, is there a point person in NGA? Would it be your staff person at the NGA that would be able to provide assistance to offices? And I'm particularly curious because in April, we're bringing hundreds of advocates and people with disabilities to DC to talk about priority issues, and the NGA report is one of those. And we want to know what to deliver.
I think in the meantime, I'm going to volunteer Emily over there, who is intentionally not making eye contact with me, to be the point of contact, and she can, you can access her. Jennifer knows how to get to Emily, and I think there are folks at NGA who worked really, really hard on this and did a great job, who are sort of moving on to some other things, so Emily can sort of help figure that out. So, but let me make one last point, and I should leave. This is, you know, and I know I'm sure you represent Democrats and Republicans alike in this room.
Yes.
This is the ultimate, if you're looking for issues where good policy intersects with good politics, regardless of party, this is it. Because there is, as you mentioned, there is, every single one of your districts has a sizable population of people with disabilities, because it cuts across every line imaginable. What could be better policy in a time when we're all focused on putting people to work? What could be better policy than helping people get back to work? And what could be better politics than people saying that you're being inclusive and reaching out to a very broad cross section of people in your districts? So it was, this was not launched as a political initiative. In fact, I'll absolutely close with this. A mutual friend of Jennifer's and mine, who has been one of my political advisors for a long time. When I told him I was choosing this initiative as NGA chair, he said, that's a big mistake. He said, you ought to do something like small business development or workforce development or something like that. Because normally the issue that the NGA chair chooses, like education reform or healthcare, these big issues. He said, this is not a smart issue. You should do something else that's going to help elevate you nationally. And I said, well, that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I think there's this huge need, and it's one where I think we can actually move the needle. And it turns out, and he actually admits now, that he was dead wrong. Because there are tens of millions of people, I don't know what's it,
56 million Americans with
there
disabilities.
are 56 million, and then they all have family members. And they're in every one of your districts. And nobody pays a whole lot of attention to them. And so when you do, it will register. So thank you for having Jennifer. Keep up the great work, TJ.
Thank you.
Matthew, thank you.
Thank you so much. Congressman Pete Sessions is on his way, but if it's okay, I'd like to have Matt just say just a couple words about some of the things they're doing in his country, and then Congressman Sessions will speak, and then TJ is going to do some interactive stuff because he's the MTV magic guy who gets stuff to happen.
Can you believe
No
it?
pressure there.
Don't mess this up.
Okay, well, I'll just try and fill the floor, I guess, until Mr. Sessions does arrive, but this is a little bit odd for me, to be honest. I'm usually sitting where you guys are. I saw Jennifer's email about this and thought it just an absolutely outstanding opportunity to try and impart, I guess, a little bit of knowledge of what I've been a part of, certainly across the last 5 or 6 years within the Australian community. Like America, our general ratio of people with a disability is very similar. I think we put it at 1 in 5, closer to 1 in 3 if estimates. Obviously, the number is always generally very conservative because some people, as we talked about a little bit earlier, don't like to associate with the word disability itself as well. So most of those numbers are usually quite substantially lowball to what they relatively actually are. In terms of where to start, I guess we're very lucky in Australia. We passed a National Disability Act back in '92 to make sure that the issues that we've just talked about in terms of lower the minimum wage issues and that sort of thing, and it very much is a social issue for me as well. And I'm not sure how many people know this, but we don't actually have an enshrined Bill of Rights within the Australian Constitution. So a lot of what we work off, and this issue in particular, I think, as the Governor did say, is one that doesn't necessarily have to be legislative as well. It is very much a social issue. It is one that we can create a lot of change. And for me, I don't think it's a thing that we want to legislate minimums. I don't think we want to legislate standards that companies, or both within the private or the public sector, have to adhere to. I don't want it to be a negative thing. It definitely has to be something that we're looking to change attitudes with through the positions and the people that we have in this room. And it's something that can be very easily done. In Australia, we've taken very much a two-pronged approach to trying to compensate and to change this issue. Both within our public sector and our private sector. A number of companies have started up their own initiatives, but one I will focus on a little bit, obviously being a Paralympian myself, our Paralympic committee has started up their own program in a sense. For us, it's called the Paralympic Diversity Program, and what it aims to do is we get guys that are both in potential programs and guys that have gone away and gone to the Paralympics, and those that are looking for work. Obviously we have a lot of younger people within our ranks as well, because Paralympic sport doesn't pay too well, to be honest, and as soon as you finish university, you're basically retired from that and furthering your life. But for us, it's we try and isolate some of those people and match them both within the public sector and the private sector, and they become champions or ambassadors for diversity within those companies. What they're able to do, obviously, is the real core to this whole plan is to just change the perspective of this issue. It's not about what these companies, what these businesses can do for that person with a disability. It's what they can do for the company. It's about education. It's about having people realise that somebody missing an arm certainly isn't going to be hindered in any way, shape or form from fitting into an office scenario. It's as we said before, manual labour particularly is something that's shied away from for a lot of people with disability as well, and that certainly is an issue. there are certain strengths, as the governor said before, that some intellectual disabilities bring to the table. Everyone's unfortunate as it will. I will reference Rain Man and those sort of movies that sort of bring particular light to the fact that some of these people have amazing strengths. So it's about finding the right jobs for the right people, which is really the biggest thing, is matching strength with strength and matching company with the person that will fit within that particular company. But going back to the program, what we're able to do, and something that's really pertinent to this whole thing, is trying to find some people that have public profiles and be able to pop them into these companies and really create that education within the company that it's okay to hire people with disability. So we have these ambassadors come in on the back of the Paralympic program. They do maybe 2 or 3 appearances or talks for the company as well as part of this program, and they become their diversity ambassador. And the whole idea is that we're taking people that are out there in the public eye in some way, shape or form, popping that are great at what they do per se as well, and popping them into these businesses that are matched to their skills, and hopefully starting to change perceptions and lead the way and open, hopefully, the floodgates, in a manner of speaking, to having those companies employ more and more people.
If I can just interrupt. In America today, 70% of Americans with disabilities are outside the workforce, 70%. So the cost to taxpayers is roughly $350 billion a year. So the percentage of Americans with disabilities who are outside the workforce has not changed even 1% since the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. And why what Matt is talking about is important is in Australia, 50% of the people with disabilities are working. So in America, 70% of the people with disabilities are not working. Okay. By the way, 28% of Americans aren't working if they're working age, because they might want to be a stay-at-home mom, or they might want to be a stay-at-home dad, or they've just decided I'm going to live off of grandpa's trust fund or whatever. 28% of people without disabilities are not in the workforce. But 70% of Americans with disabilities are outside of the workforce. They're not counted in the unemployment numbers because technically they're not unemployed because they're getting disability payments. So they're this mysterious group of people. But by the way, there's 9 million of them, 9 million Americans, and they're getting paid on average, around $1,200 to $1,400 a month, which is poverty level. They're isolated. It's a horrific thing to live constantly on dependency and not to be valued and appreciated and able to be part of society. And what Matt is talking about, it sounds so simple. And so I was kind of watching your eyes thinking, boy, that sounds really simple. A guy who's a celebrity comes into a company and talks. Well, you know what? 50% of people with disabilities in Australia are working, compared to only 30% here. So they're doing something right that we're not doing, and the something right that they're doing isn't costing them a lot of tax money, and it's also saving them a lot of tax money because they have a lot fewer people who are dependent. So I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I just wanted to underscore that.
Absolutely. And the big thing that particularly happened in Australia, I know there's obviously some very pertinent differences in political systems and particularly our healthcare systems, but something that really came to the forefront for us in the last 6 to 12 months was something called the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which was a piece of legislation that basically meant that any child in a wheelchair was going to have access, that needed a wheelchair was going to have access to that wheelchair up until they were 18. Anybody that needed a prosthetic was going to have access to a prosthetic up until the age of 18. So adulthood was the cutoff, and there's all sorts of other things that were involved in this piece of legislation, but that's none to the fact. The fact is that issue suddenly became very high and front of stage in the consciousness of the Australian people. And it really did absolutely solidify what was just said here, that disability is not something that any of our bosses can be seen to be against. It's an issue that definitely bridges both sides of politics. It's something that's always going to be a positive, and we're not talking about, I think the important thing about what was said just before is we're talking about creating jobs. Yes, we're talking about but we're not talking about spending money to do that. That's the important thing. Most of these initiatives are absolutely zero cost and can be done without having to put anything into them. It's just about being smart in the way that we go about this. But on the forefront to this NDIS coming to the forefront of our political system, the public service, the APS in Australia, noticed a steady decline in the percentages of people with a disability working within the public sector, and they decided they were going to band together and set a minimum standard for the percentage of people that they wanted to have with a disability employed within our government agencies, setting a 5-year goal to get back to what it was back in 1980. So that was a very positive thing for us, and we've definitely seen that help and increase the change in diversity. All of our major departments, I actually worked for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade back home in Australia, and that was hence the roundabout sort of way of wine here today. But I managed to help set up and get the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade involved in this scheme that the Paralympic Committee are putting out as well. So I guess to try and sum up as well, for me this issue is one that we have to address both through the employment side of things, but also I think I said a little bit about it earlier, but it's really a social issue that goes back to education at a very young age. We still have too many youngsters that come up and never have had any sort of exposure to people with a disability or understand the ability side of this, and we're always constantly judged. I hate to say that, it's the 21st century, and I really still feel like I'm back in the 50s sometimes, but people can come up to you and judge you before even meeting you and have you open your mouth, and that's something that we've got to change from 8-10-year-old kids, so that we don't have these issues when we're talking about employment. It really is a big scale thing, but we obviously want to be targeting both areas, and employment is a huge one, and definitely the younger ages as well, and having people employed is going to transfer to, it's a cyclical thing. So if there's any questions about anything that I've said, I'm more than happy to answer anything, or if you want me to guide you in any sort of direction, please just ask.
Not all at once.
I'm gonna turn it over to TJ.
All right. Next, sorry. So I see all of you guys paying attention, like super paying attention. Why did you guys come here? Why did you guys come here? There's got to be somebody that you know that with a disability, or maybe you have them. I mean, why did you
Well,
come
we were
here?
visited, came by and talked to us about it, and I think the most salient, most important point about it is that this is something that can bring both sides together, just because the biggest issue is just understanding education.
Right.
And we had a discussion in my office about, really, if you just gave every office a packetized set of information, this is somewhere you can make partnership between private business, this is the way we can spread information awareness, and this is how you can get involved. It's there are just some very easy steps, I think, from talking about the different governors, talking about members of Congress. When you're talking about making people change the way they think about something from the disability to the ability, that's a very salient, easy point, I think. It's just a matter of thinking about it that way. The first time you think about it, though, it's like,
Makes sense.
Yeah, but I mean, it's incredible that this is the first time I've ever heard it positive that way, with the exception of autism. And that's a conversation I've heard multiple times before in terms of analytical and retentive abilities. But, this around the table, I think, is an important change.
Yeah, somebody's saying, oh man, they're going to take it a little more serious now. They're at work. You know what I
It's
mean?
not just about, it's not just like a subsidization plan or some kind of, see, I appreciated what you said about, you don't want this to be a resentful thing. I mean, I think you breed contempt and resentment when people look at it negatively instead of positively. This is a mandate. This isn't about how do people function in this environment.
And we're also talking about putting people with those skills in those particular places. The last thing that you want is resentment in a workplace with somebody that's clearly underskilled, doing something that they shouldn't be doing. That's not what we're talking about. It's just making sure that people are matched in particular workplaces that match their skills. That's very, very important. But I know Pete Sessions actually organises an intern program here on the Hill for people with disabilities, and I definitely would implore officers to get involved in that every time it comes around every year as well. And it's just simple things. It's exposure, it's education, as you said.
Mm-hmm. And that's something we're involved in too. Our chief of staff's son has Down syndrome as well, and I think it's kind of a motivating factor. Obviously, our awareness level is higher from the front end, and I mean everybody has family, friends, and people close to the family that have disability of some form. But when it's that close to the president of the office, it helps you think. But that's why I think
it's pretty good at it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean that's kind of the. You just gotta let people see it one time, and then it changes the way you think about it.
Yeah. Anybody else? Why'd you come?
I've got a cousin with Down syndrome who's about to, an age where he might not expect what employment opportunities exist for him. And I think if the conversation can be changed, so that, developing the skills that he may have, and he can really raise his expectations for growing up and being a part of the workforce, being a part of something bigger than himself, could really bring up his self-esteem. And I just think this is an important program.
Right on. Yeah, perfect.
My sister has an intellectual disability, and so I was actually hoping if I could, hoping to find some guidance for her to find a job.
Nice. Cool. You?
I worked on the 1996 welfare reform law. And one of the goals of that was to try to increase workforce participation by people who now are on public benefits. And I think one of the benefits that I've gotten just sitting here listening to this presentation was to find out that in the 20 years or so since, well, 25 now practically, since the Americans with Disabilities Act, workforce participation has changed less than 1%.
Correct.
Despite a major reform like that, which means that there was a big failure there on a policy basis.
Correct.
And I don't know if, do you guys work with Peter Cove at America Works?
I haven't worked with Peter Cove at America Works yet, but I can tell you that the Americans with Disabilities Act was a very successful piece of legislation in that it enabled people to have architecture. Architecture so that the doors are wider, so that my colleague Donald, who's behind me, who happens to use a motorized scooter, can get in buildings and get out of buildings, so that children can have access to public schools. It's an architectural, and it helped with IDEA and educational. But it did not do what needed to happen on attitudinal. And we just completed a national survey of 3,800 people from the disability community. Half of them had disabilities, half of them were family members of people with disabilities. And what we found was that people felt that the attitudes were the most important barrier to employment, is that people don't see the person who's the value added to the employer. They don't see that the person with Down syndrome who takes tickets at AMC has stayed in that job for 20 years, whereas the teenager comes and goes and doesn't show up on Thursday night if he gets a date with somebody cute, but the man with Down syndrome who takes it seriously never misses work and is a wonderful employee, doesn't see the person who is blind who can read a computer better than somebody who isn't blind. So there's a lot of opportunities that are out there that people don't see. So the attitude piece, so every one of you who works for a member of Congress can highlight the successes in your district. Every district, there's some place that's doing this right. You could set up, for no money, you can set up an award in your district for the employer who's doing a good job, for whom it is helping their company do a better job and make more money. Not because it's charity, it has to be showcasing where it makes a good business case, and then other people can follow because it's a good, but yeah, zero improvement in almost 25 years, zero improvement. So it was a necessary law, but it was not a sufficient law, and it's not doing what it needs to do. Because again, 9 million Americans are living on benefits. This is so similar to the 96 law that you worked on, so similar, because like that, there were people on welfare who wanted to work. There are people with disabilities who really want that opportunity. And the whole system, the way it's structured, the way the benefits system is structured, is disincentivize the work. The incentives are wrong, and if you save more than $2,000, you put yourself at risk for some very significant things. And so there's a lot that has to be done, a lot of awareness that needs to happen. Sorry.
Don't want to happen again. All right. Any questions? Any answers?
Well, just to follow up a little bit about Peter Cove, because I had a meeting with some of his folks a couple of days ago. And this will, you have this continuum of disabilities, some of which are physical, some of which are mental, emotional, and intellectual. Their biggest challenge, because they're a contractor, they come in and do ticket to work. by a state or local government will hire them to work with Ticket to Work clients, which is for people who may not live in this world. It is a pathway for people who are on SSI to begin to sort of wean themselves off of the public benefit system and enter the world of work and earnings. And the biggest challenge, they told me, that they have with their Ticket to Work clients is leaving kids who were brought up in the disability system. They may have had ADHD or these kinds of conditions where as children they were put into the disability system, sometimes because it was in the economic interest of the parent to do that, whether their disability was of a level of severity where they should have been placed
Coming
in that category is open to question, but since childhood they've been brought up with this concept of being disabled and with the expectation that when they turn 18 then they transfer to adult disability roles. And their biggest challenge is convincing folks who have been through that pipeline to take on the risk of leaving the assurance of the benefit system for a world of risk, which for the non-disabled, basically, that's the world we live in, which is you have to go out and, you know, find a position, have a job, and you're not guaranteed that there will be a check coming every month. So I mean, what they were telling me is a big challenge here is attitudinal in the part of people who've been brought up in the system of learning that they can be better off leaving that system for a world of employment.
Right.
Without the guarantee of having the benefit come every month.
So let me actually follow up to that, because that's a really important point. When you are a child and you have a diagnosis, you get a label, and that label is, it's your ticket to benefits. You might get payments, you might get a free wheelchair, you might get therapies if you have autism to help reduce the symptoms and enable you to be more engaged in society. There are a lot of benefits that you get, but sometimes what you get is you get a label that says low expectation that travels with you for the rest of your life. So one of the things that we're working with Governor Markell and Congressman Sessions and others of is a complete paradigm shift to something called an employment first